I've touched on this before, but I want to explain a bit my views on the regressive left. Now, a disclaimer here that's quite important. I don't want anyone to think this is just a generic attack on left-leaning people. Absolutely not. I've known many left-leaning people in my life, and I'm in a part of the United Kingdom which is more Labour-leaning than Conservative. It's definitely I guess you could say, a lefty area in some ways. I've known many liberals. I've known many people who would probably describe themselves socialist, who I've rather liked on a personal level, even if I don't agree with their politics. So this is absolutely not an attack on all left-leaning people. That's very important to understand because people might say, "Oh, Nathan, but this and that." But I do want to talk about the regressive left. Firstly, what do we mean by regressive left? Well, some of the ideals that traditional left wing people are supposed to be all about, I think they've abandoned in their drive to be considered inclusive in their thinking. One example of this is in their response to Islamist extremism. You will get left wing figures like Jeremy Corbyn who will condemn terrorism. Anyone can condemn terrorism, it's the easiest thing to do, but will never or be very reluctant to talk about and name Islamic extremism. There's this strange juxtaposition, aligning of the political left and Islamism in recent years. And this is strange because Islamism is an ultra conservative ideology. And I think it's partly to do with this idea that because Muslims are minorities in Western countries, if you criticize their religion, that somehow is bigotry or that somehow is Islamophobia. I have a very big problem with that. I think it is really illiberal to have this idea that if you criticize religious extremes, if you criticize religious dogma, that equates to bigotry. Of course, there is anti Muslim bigots out there. I've seen it, and I am totally against that. I think what genuine progressives need to be doing is, and self described liberals need to be working with reformist Muslims, and some do, but there are others who, I mean, that's why I got so angry with the Liberal Democrats recently when they were going to expel a candidate because he made some honest, he was honest in his views about Islamic extremism and the indoctrination, for example, of young children with the hijab. So things like this, I think the left really, again, it's not all left wing people, but the regressive left have a very strange attitude to that. Despite the fact Islamism is the polar opposite, a direct threat to women's rights, to gay rights, things that you would think they would be all about. But there's many other areas as well. I do see a growing intolerance with the regressive left. I mean, why is it that you could take a lot of major issues, right? So it's the way they throw words around. It's the way they smear people so casually, such as racist. And we see, ironically, here kind of battles within the left. I mean, when left wing celebrities, particularly white left wing celebrities, clamber to be kind of seen as the most woke, the most progressive, sometimes they themselves end up getting accused of cultural appropriation, which I personally think is a bit of a nonsense term because we're all guilty of cultural appropriation on some level, including those pointing the fingers. But it's kind of ironic. There's a lot of left on left battles going on here. Feminist versus trans activists would be another one. But um, the racism thing, I mean, just because someone has concerns about immigration, just because someone believes in the importance of integration, and just because someone is recognizing, for example, that there may be specific problems in specific areas. For example, London has a problem with young black men in gangs. It's just a fact of life. Recognizing these things does not make someone a racist. And it really angers me how the word gets thrown around so much that it becomes devalued. Um, Identity politics is absolutely toxic. And you see double standards. By the way, if I run out of time, I'm going to make another video because that could very well happen. But there was recently a music festival in Detroit, and it charged white people more for entrance. Now, to be fair, some of the black rappers that have been scheduled to appear voluntarily pulled out in protest, so credit to them. It's not often I give credit to rappers, but yeah, I do give them credit. Racism is racism. Yet when it's black racists or Asian racists, they get free pass. And I would argue the regressive left promotes this. They give a platform to it. When Sarah Jong of the New York Times made racist rants against all white people, instead of firing her as they should have done, they made excuses for her and they made eventually groveling apologies. But then it kind of got framed as, oh, it's just angry white men, angry right wing white men who have a problem with this. Well, no, I'm not that right wing and I had a problem with it. Any common sense white person should have a problem with it if you're being tarred with the same brush, you know? It's just a human reaction. So the double standards that white left wingers sometimes promote is pathetic. I mean, I do find that rather hard to understand. A white person who is okay with anti white racism. That would be like a black person being okay with anti black racism. You know, racism is racism. I'm against all of it, period. And I think if you're truly anti racist, you have to be consistent. And the problem is then white people, when they have a problem with it, they're accused of, oh, well, you don't recognize the history, you don't know the context. And then you're given a lecture about the civil rights movement and how hard black people had it, which they did. There's no question about that. But I mean, that Detroit Music Festival, for example, nothing justifies charging white people more. They made some groveling excuse about, oh, well, historically, black people, blah, 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 blah. Discrimination's discrimination, whatever way you frame it. If you're charging people more because of the color of their skin, that's discrimination. And I hope the ticket sales collapsed. I hope they felt the backlash from that. You know, I'd be saying the same thing if it was a white concert charging black people more, but that would almost be inconceivable today because the backlash would be so much greater. So those double standards are rather infuriating. Um, Feminism, why is it that you can only prove that you care about women's rights by pigeonholing yourself as a feminist? Why is it feminists bully women to call themselves feminists? Why is it feminists so often dictate to other women how they should live their lives? Um, and I'm not going to go into great detail here, but I think there's a deep intolerance, misandry, and bullying nature to third wave feminism, and it's like a lot of these attitudes you get in the political left, kind of hiding behind this moral high ground. Well, or we're about women's rights, so we're always right, no matter what way we do it, no matter how intolerant we are, no matter how loud we are. It's a particularly unpleasant thing. Trans activism is becoming increasingly aggressive. I mean, you can say you believe in trans people being treated in a humane way with dignity, etc. But if you don't slavishly go along with not just the trans issue, but all LGBT issues, if you don't go along with all of it 100%, then you must be a horrible homophobic bigot. Okay, you can say that you even support gay marriage, you support equal rights, you support people being treated in an equal way, but you don't believe, for example, in special privileges or something like gender or race or sexual orientation kind of being used as a way to, people always hiding behind that. Because I think some people do. I think some people will say, oh, it's because I'm gay, it's because I'm a woman, it's because I'm black, it's because I'm white, right? there will be some people who always use a demographic as an excuse. And I'm not saying that we live in a perfect world. There is discrimination. There are areas that greatly need to improve. I'm not being ignorant about that. All I'm saying is that there are some people who hide behind it and they use it as an excuse whenever anyone disagrees with them. So you'll get certain feminists whenever a man disagrees with them, particularly in politics. Oh, it's because I'm a woman. He must be talking down to me. Um, you get some minority people who will insist that they've been discriminated against if they don't get a job. And sometimes that might be true, but more often than not, I don't think an employer would risk that. Um, I mean, we're seeing actually violence breaking out with the likes of Antifa. And then when too many moderate left wing people make excuses for Antifa, or they say things like, oh, well, they're not really left wing, except that they are. They're extreme left wingers. So call a spade a spade. By the way, just to close up here, definitely there are right wing equivalents. I am not a right winger, and there are many, many areas I take issue with the right. And I'll be making a video about, I'll call it the regressive right. But, I just really find that there is a growing intolerance from people who claim to have a monopoly on tolerance, who claim that only their ideology, only their way of thinking can prove to be open-minded, and it really it's unpleasant because people are being smeared as racists, as bigots, as homophobes, and sometimes they are. I'm not saying that the accusations are always false, but more often than not, these terms are just thrown around. It's not right. When people are having their careers threatened, when people are having their reputations threatened, I mean, all of these things, third wave feminism, certain aspects of the LGBT movement, um, and identity politics are just getting, in my view, out of hand. They're becoming incredibly intolerant, and it's actually pushing a lot of centre left people to the centre, and in some cases, even to the right, because these are people who actually are liberal and who are left wing in many areas, but because of the bullying, because of the stigmatizing that you get from the regressive left, it's pushing people away. In fact, only today, Gloria De Piero resigned from Labour's front bench. I don't know the exact details, but her office has cited an intolerance to different points of view within Corbyn's Labour Party. Take from that what you will.